Scattered across the former territories of the Roman Empire, archaeologists have unearthed mysterious 12-sided objects known to modern scholars as Roman dodecahedrons. Each of the 12 faces has a circular hole in the center, and the holes vary in diameter. The faces connect to form a hollow interior, and at each of the 20 vertices there's usually a small spherical knob or protrusion. The metal dodecahedrons are often decorated with geometric patterns, circles, lines, or dots engraved around the holes, but none bear any written inscriptions or numerical markings. They also rarely show signs of wear or damage, likely suggesting they weren't heavily used as tools. But hang tight, we're going to go down the rabbit hole in a moment. Chronologically, Roman dodecahedrons date to the 2nd through 4th centuries AD, placing them in the late Roman Empire period. The first documented discovery of such a dodecahedron was made in 1739 in England, and antiquarians at the time were as puzzled by the object as we remain today. Since that 18th century find, scholars and collectors have identified over 100 of these artifacts across Europe. Despite their identical geometric shape, each dodecahedron is unique. They differ slightly in size, hole diameter, decoration, and proportions, as if individually crafted, rather than mass-produced from a single template. Notably, the craftsmanship required to cast a complex hollow dodecahedron with even thin walls and protruding knobs is considerable. It would have demanded a skilled metalworker and a substantial amount of bronze, indicating that these were costly objects likely made to order rather than cheap common trinkets. Part of the dodecahedron mystery lies in where they've been found and the contexts of their discovery. Strikingly, these artifacts are geographically concentrated in the northern and western provinces of the Roman Empire. Examples have turned up in Britain, northern France, the Low Countries, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and as far east as Hungary. None have been conclusively documented in the heartland of the empire or in the eastern Mediterranean lands. This distribution map is one of our strongest clues. It suggests that whatever purpose the dodecahedron served was particularly relevant to the Romano-Celtic populations in northwest Europe. This has led some scholars to speculate that the objects might have had a specific cultural function in Romano-Celtic society, emerging from the fusion of Roman and indigenous traditions. In terms of archaeological context, dodecahedrons have been uncovered in a variety of settings, but unfortunately, in many cases, the precise context was poorly recorded. A number of specimens were discovered in the 18th and 19th centuries by amateur investigators, who often kept them as curiosities, but failed to document where they found them. Nonetheless, where context is known, it varies widely. Some dodecahedra come from Roman forts or garrisons, others from civilian towns, and a few from rural farmsteads or villas. In at least one case, one of them has been found in a grave, suggesting it had been intended as something for the deceased to take with them to the afterlife. Several dodecahedrons have turned up as part of coin hoards, buried alongside Roman coins. Finding them amid treasure troves of coins hints that their owners considered these objects valuable possessions, possibly items worth hiding or safeguarding, much like money. The question of what these objects were used for has sparked a debate that has now gone on for 3 centuries, and to this day, no consensus exists. Interestingly, no written description of these objects survives in any known Roman literature or inscriptions. Thus, every proposed answer is essentially an educated guess based on the dodecahedron's form and the circumstances of the find. Over the years, archaeologists, historians, and enthusiastic amateurs have put forward a wide range of theories for how these items were used. And before I get into the theories, there's been literally hundreds of plausible proposed usages for these objects, and I encourage you to propose your own in the comments as well. One popular idea is that dodecahedrons were optical devices used by Roman engineers to estimate distances. The user might sight a distant object through pairs of opposite holes. Since each face's hole is a different diameter, one could choose the hole that just fits the object in view, thereby roughly gauging the object's distance. Alternatively, they might have been used to survey land and lay out military camps using simple geometric principles. While intriguing, this theory faces challenges. Notably, no dodecahedron has any engraved calibration marks or numbers that one would expect on a measuring instrument. Further, if this was the case, one would expect the items to be found all over the Mediterranean world, rather than confined to regions with Celtic populations. Early historians, upon first encountering these strange objects, thought they might be related to weapons. They suggested that it may have been a type of projectile to be hurled by a sling or artillery piece. However, the artifacts are generally too lightweight, some weigh only a few dozen grams, and are too intricately made to serve as effective weapons. Further, none show the impact damage or wear one would expect if they had been used in this way. Thus, modern scholars dismiss the weapon hypothesis as implausible. A related martial theory suggests they weren't weapons, but a base for military standards. For example, as a decorative base to hold the staff of the legion's eagle standard. Yet, no legionary standard recovered from antiquity includes such an item, and standard poles typically use simpler, more robust fittings. This idea, while theoretically possible, remains unsupported by any direct evidence, and again faces the geographic issue discussed previously. A few examples have been found with traces of wax residue inside, which hints that someone in antiquity might have used them as a candle holder. The hollow center could accommodate a lump of wax, and the many holes would allow light to emanate outward in patterns. The protruding knobs might even serve to rest the object on a surface or to lift it when hot. However, skeptics note that a bronze dodecahedron has an open bottom. Any candle drippings would just fall out, and no obvious handle or hanger for use as a lamp. The candle holder theory remains a plausible partial explanation for how some people repurpose these objects, but it may not have been their primary intended function. Among the more creative practical theories is that dodecahedrons served as textile tools. Specifically, some have suggested they were used for knitting gloves or weaving, functioning like a multi-spool knitting loom. In modern times, small wooden frames with pegs can produce a tubular knit. Perhaps the Romans, this theory argues, used the holes and knobs of the bronze dodecahedron in a similar way to knit seamless woolen gloves for cold northern winters. Experimental archaeology enthusiasts have indeed managed to knit a rudimentary glove using a replica dodecahedron, demonstrating it's physically possible. Proponents point out that it's no coincidence these objects are absent in the warmer Mediterranean. They mostly appear in colder climates where gloves would be useful. However, this theory faces a chronological snag. The technique of spool knitting isn't documented until the 16th century, and we have no evidence the Romans used this method. Of course, it's always possible that this was a technology that was lost in late antiquity or the early Middle Ages. After all, this was an extremely turbulent period, where a lot of knowledge was lost in the former regions of the empire where the dodecahedrons are found. A simpler possibility is that these were leisure items, perhaps a kind of game dice or tossing toy. A few scholars have wondered if the dodecahedron could be a specialized die for a game now lost to history. The 12 faces might correspond to something, in a game of chance or divination. We know that Romans did use polyhedral dice, so a 12-sided die isn't far-fetched at all. However, All known Roman gaming dice have their faces clearly marked with numbers or symbols, something the dodecahedrons notably lack. Moreover, the dodecahedrons' faces are punctured with holes, which would make them roll oddly and inconsistently. Another intriguing theory, albeit highly speculative, suggests Roman dodecahedrons may have functioned similarly to speculative asset classes. In this scenario, they were like Dutch tulips in the 17th century or modern cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. Under this theory, these objects could have been intentionally crafted without practical utility, their value derived purely from rarity, mystery, and perception rather than tangible usefulness. The craftsmanship of dodecahedrons may have made them attractive for speculative trade or investment among wealthy Roman citizens or collectors. If this theory is true, I like to imagine these Romano-Celtic regions had dodecahedron bros who were eager to explain the future use cases of these items. Their appearance in coin hoards supports this theory to some degree, implying that at least some Romans viewed them as sufficiently valuable to be concealed alongside currency. Much like contemporary speculative bubbles, the exact mechanism for their valuation would have depended on cultural fascination and a sense of a fear of missing out. Though there's no direct textual evidence supporting such speculation-driven value, this theory intriguingly frames the dodecahedrons as ancient predecessors of modern financial instruments. In the absence of a clear practical purpose, many archaeologists turn to the explanation of last resort. Perhaps the dodecahedrons were ritual or religious objects. They could have served as sacred symbols, divination devices, or ceremonial items in a local cult. Notably, the concentration of finds in Celtic-influenced regions has led to the idea that they were tied to Celtic religious practices under Roman rule. For instance, they might have been used by Druids or gallo-roman priests for fortune-telling or astrology. Alternatively, they may have been magical charms of some particular significance to Celtic populations. A less discussed but sensible idea is that dodecahedrons had no functional purpose at all. If this is the case, the beauty of these items is precisely that they didn't do anything whatsoever, and that they might be the result of craftsmanship for its own sake. There are two main variants on this line of thought, and I'm going to start with the more obscure theory first. Some have speculated that these were showpieces made by master metalworkers to demonstrate their skill in casting complex geometric shapes. And before I get into this theory, it's important to note that the Roman depictions of Celtic people always portrayed them as producing high-quality metalworkers. This is a characterization that went back to the era of the Roman Republic, during the earliest interactions with the Celtic people who inhabited what is now northern Italy. It's been speculated that making one of these complex items may have served as a proof of skill to become a master metalworker. It was undoubted proof that a craftsman had mastered difficult angles and hollow casting, skills which were highly in demand. In the same vein, others have speculated that showing off a Roman dodecahedron could have served as a portfolio for a craftsman. Further supporting this interpretation is the notable individuality of each discovered dodecahedron. No two are exactly alike in size, hole diameter, or decorative details, indicating personal craftsmanship rather than standardized mass production. Thus, under this theory, the dodecahedron became both an ad and a credential, announcing to the ancient world where one stood on the artisanal pecking order. It was physical proof that the individual was a craftsman of the highest caliber, and as always, it's better to show rather than to tell. Another related theory is that they're simply art, and not intended to have any specific practical function. As I mentioned earlier, Celtic people were highly respected by the Romans for their ability to produce master craftsmen. As a brief aside, these Celtic people weren't simply producing functional items either, but works of high art. Celtic torques, which are neck rings which were used to show off wealth and status as far back as the pre-Roman Celtic world, were renowned throughout the Mediterranean world. By the time the dodecahedrons were being produced, many Celtic people had been thoroughly integrated into the Roman world. This may have allowed these craftsmen to level up their abilities across the generations, especially combined with Hellenic geometric understanding. The objects have a kind of mathematical beauty that could have been admired for their aesthetics in a wealthy household. If they were display pieces, their value would be aesthetic or intellectual rather than utilitarian. The fact that many were kept carefully, even hoarded, might indicate they were treasured as conversation pieces or status symbols. This theory is hard to verify or refute. It essentially suggests the dodecahedron is a product of art for art's sake in the gallo-roman world. Considering the expense of metal and the cost of time of a highly skilled craftsman, this wouldn't have been common, but perhaps a few rich enthusiasts enjoyed puzzling objects. While this theory is tempting, it once again potentially fails to account for the geographic distribution of the items. Due to their satisfying geometry, the objects appear to be universally aesthetic, and not something that would just appeal to Celtic tastes. Given that they appear over the course of hundreds of years, it seems likely that this cultural fascination would have spread beyond Celtic regions into other parts of the Roman world. However, it's always a possibility that since the cultural fascination arose in the Celtic part of the Roman world, the form of art may have been viewed as unsophisticated by many Romans. That said, this seems unlikely, since Roman writers, who were universally writing to appeal to elite tastes, had long praised the metalworking ability of Celtic people. Having a genuine Celtic crafted piece seems like it may have been a plus for a dodecahedron, and elite Romans loved showing off their vast array of foreign goods. The mystery of the Roman dodecahedron hasn't been lost on modern scholars, and it features regularly in both academic research and popular history discussions. Modern academic opinion, in the absence of hard evidence, tends to catalog the dodecahedron as an unsolved mystery. In museums, labels often list multiple possible uses without committing to one, instead letting the observer figure out what they thought they may have been used for. Despite the lack of a clear answer, the serious study of these objects continues, and every new find potentially holds the clue to solving this ancient mystery. But of course, perhaps the last thing that needs to be discussed is the most important. What evidence would definitively prove what the purpose of these objects was? To finally solve the mystery of the Roman dodecahedron, historians need a clear, undeniable piece of evidence. Ideally, this would be something from the Romans themselves. It remains a distinct possibility that there's a lost manuscript waiting to be found that discusses what these are and what they were used for. Notably, during and after the 4th century, a great degree of Roman writing ended up shifting towards Christian theological debates. If the dodecahedrons were used for pagan ritual practices in Celtic regions, as has been suggested, it's conceivable that we could discover a new manuscript that documents or denounces them. The fact that many writings from antiquity are transmitted to us through monks making copies in the Middle Ages means this is a distinct possibility, since religious texts were prioritized. Another possibility is finding an ancient inscription with instructions specifically explaining what the dodecahedrons did. This would immediately settle the debate, similar to how ancient tablets helped historians understand Mesopotamian artifacts that had long puzzled them. Another way to crack the case would be discovering dodecahedrons alongside other objects that we already understand well. For example, if archaeologists uncovered several dodecahedrons stored next to known surveying tools or measuring instruments, it would strongly suggest they served a similar function. Basically, finding the Roman dodecahedron in its proper context, alongside something we already know, would potentially finally solve one of ancient history's most puzzling mysteries. Until then, we're left speculating, waiting for that one piece of evidence to emerge from the past, which would let all the puzzle pieces fall into place. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like and subscribe and share this video with your friends and family.